So last time we gathered and we spoke about totalitarianism as a topic. And I found that meaningful and valuable. As you know, for those of you who've been coming along, experimenting with the constraints of what this space can be, and also what it may take or what will be helpful to create the field of consciousness that could be most helpful for really welcoming and enabling truth for a start. It's part of the project, it's part of the effort. And so later on, I'm going to give a bit of a talk first, but later on I'm going to grab a chair here, and we're going to face them together. And I want to invite people to come up and dialogue with me. You'll have the microphone to use so we can project the voice a little bit. Unfortunately, I forgot my other mic, but I'll be able to project, no problem. Or we can pass it between each other. And because last time, invited people up, I vacated the stage, and there's something about, as I am doing now, here I am projecting to everybody. That's valuable and worthwhile, but for the sake of cultivating a dialogue, what I've noticed, if we have two people on stage, but who are both facing the audience, then the pull is naturally to address the audience. Again, that's fine, but just the simple act of having the chairs face each other so that the constraint and the invitation is to really tune in to building that dialogical context of understanding together is very, very different. And then the audience obviously then will be viewing that, and we'll all be on the journey together, and we know we're here, but I'm curious about how that constraint will change what's possible to hold together and weave together. There's been some questions that were submitted when people purchase tickets. And so we'll use those to structure some of the conversation a bit later. But as I have done for the last few events, I've said some words at the beginning, and I'm going to do so now just by way of opening the topic. I've spent a long time considering this, a lot of writing, a lot of real deep engagement. And I feel that in sharing that effort and that energy, maybe we'll meet the promise of this and to try and offer something, in exchange for your time and energy in coming here. Because truth and power, and the event title here, Truth to Power, I had in mind, speaking truth to power. They're powerful words, they're important words. And to the degree we care about our influence in the world, our understanding of reality, all of this beyond the cavern of this here, then truth, as well as what conditions our speech, constrains our understanding within us, as well as beyond us, these are important things to reckon with. Is it the case that these constraints are growing in our time? Has it always been thus? Have we always been keeping inside the lines of what the norms or the rule set, the Lord, the state, the family, whatever they decree, not rocking the boat too much? We can't rock the boat too much, or we'll be chucked out the boat. We're all in it together. Or are we? That feels to me to be one of the questions at the moment. I think this disconnect between the so-called elites and people in general, that's something surely that's coming into a little bit more question now. Most of us would probably agree. Are there different rules for different classes? For the last few hundred years of at least Western civilization, that seems to be the case. Is it just? Should it be so? What recourse might we have? What good is speaking truth to power if power can crush truth? And how certain are we of our connection to truth so as to bring it before power? All of these, just some opening questions to begin with. It was occurring to me that there might be an important concept missing from just naming truth and power. And of course, whenever we say truth, we might also think of goodness and beauty. But also in the case of power, we might also think of love. And it did strike me that working our way toward remembering or finding that connection with love in and amongst all of that would seem deeply necessary. Otherwise, which truth? The more beautiful one, the good one, the more loving one. I could just start describing the contours of those bricks. I suppose we're here in part because I like the contours of those bricks. Now, the thing that I did have in mind to share, now that that preamble is complete, is something that I do find hard to broach, something I've written a lot about. And in times of particularly activated connection, in experience with others, in my own being, it's something which comes to presence quite readily after a certain amount of resistance has been, if not overcome, then accepted, moved through, metabolized. We could say the relation between soul and spirit. We could say the relation between psyche and nature. We could say the relation between man and God. And man and God, my own personal relation with God, whatever that means for now, it's not been a simple one. It's been a challenging one for as long as I can remember. When I use the word God, particularly at this point in address, I also think of nature and I think of creativity. You could put slashes between all of those. We could say different philosophical things, different frameworks, different games of language that employ these terms differently. Go back a few thousand years or spend time in some context of indigenous thought, and words for spirit, nature, you might find they stand in a similar place to God, although they bring different connotations. Greater than might be another way to think about it. What we open up to, what we can open up to. But also, as I see it anyway, what we can challenge. I don't believe God is all-powerful, that nature is all-powerful, in the sense of it being on the one hand beyond us, and at the same time complete in its understanding of who we are and the creativity we bring to interaction. Which is to say, I think that in an encounter with nature, in encounter with creativity, we might say as a vessel for creativity, but it doesn't seem to me to be just a vessel. In connection, in communion, in relation, in conversation with God, there is something two-way about it. I think that's something like what conscience means. Always seems to me to be an arduous thing. I shouldn't say always, but often an arduous thing that really takes something. You really have to give yourself to it. You might have to open up to something that's challenging or painful, something you weren't letting in before, something that may have been in the shadow. And perhaps when we open up and ask a question to receive a response, whether from the wind, whether from what animates in our field of consciousness, as a voice, as a knowing, as an intuition, whether it comes through in writing or art, at the behest of something more than just your egoic writing. Some sense of real that was a response to a question truly asked. It seems to me that the language of greater than, God, nature, creativity, has relevance in such contexts. A kind of participation in faith, a kind of opening to mystery. Now, the reason I say any of this in the context of an event like Truth to Power is because I thought, well, there's a sense in which we might take some idea of God to be ultimately powerful. Is it not the paragon of absolute power, omnipotence, omniscience, all the rest of it? Likewise, the magnificence, the utter overwhelm of nature, of a life-death process and a complexity that continues beyond our momentary flux. If we are to speak truth to power, perhaps cultivating the capacity to dwell in relation with and meet some source of near enough absolute power would be something of a good training ground, and maybe an imperative. One steps into the domain of politics or some well-resourced network with lots of good or not so good ideas, but nevertheless momentum and conviction, at least on the surface level, even if it means preferring one group to another, where millions or maybe billions could be unfavored in the becoming of our world. Real decisions being made today which do have an influence on whether or not there'll be enough food for 8 billion people. So in the context of potential famine, it would seem that words of justice would be in order to the degree that we think they could have some chance of doing some good. And so if we want to raise a note of truth today, what would it be to rightfully empower ourselves and rightfully empower our voice so that we just we're not going to go about adding more bullshit, adding more mere preference or something less thought, something less integrated, something less caring, really in touch with the spirit of our time, the spirit of the depths, all of that. And so I'm really interested in those moments in life where we know that orientation, it's sway one way or another, where we have the choice, it seems, to accept what is flowing before us, what might be maneuvering us, wills us, and perhaps the dignity of our will, our sense of beauty, our sense of justice. What is it to strengthen that capacity, to know when to speak up and from where? And what is it when that voice meets others, cultivates relationship, is met by different aspects of the system, a dominant system that might want no such frequency of that voice? Or networks with plenty of good ideas, as I've said before, who just right now don't really want to open up to that kind of difference. I think somewhere in there, somewhere in how we cultivate our sense of why speak, where we're speaking from, and what we are resonating as an orientation of attention, as an orientation of conscience. Attentions was what my brain wanted to something put in there. That, I think, although I don't know how good a job I've done at articulating, is extremely interesting. And I think that something like that, a field, networks, contexts, that really care for the cultivation of that and the support of that, the encouragement of that, with some lightness too, but when it's needed, for that energy, that resonance to be present, in the context of exchange that welcomes different faculties of cognition, feeling and awareness and all of that, embodiment, that I think we need that as a profound kind of integrity check on the intelligibility, the understanding, all of that. That's part of the context at all. Otherwise, it does seem to me that we are just going to be in a situation of, we'll say, like, welcome on your mere politics and situations of power, might makes right, and no space, no field, no time outside of that politics of might and perhaps market competition and the various ways that states and companies are already and will continue to collude to figure out ways to track, influence, control, speech, activity, movement. I'll make those as contentions as we enter this deglobalizing era, at least contentions that is a strong attractor in the field of possibility. I don't think a necessity, but I think that in order to strengthen and enable the possibility for the kind of mutual support, commons, participation in understanding more broadly, and many other things. We need that quality of, I was talking with Rania about this the other day. Rania, I was attempting to articulate what we spoke about in terms of the conscience relationship between man and God, and that, in my view, there's a time to step up from kneeling and to speak the truth of one's being, and in that way be in dialogue with that greater than, and that in a field that supports the presence of conscience, that affirms itself in a space, in dignified relationship with the beyond, with creativity, with nature. This sort of thing is necessary for the strengthening of awareness and spirit and general integrity for the kind of context that can hope to create the space to speak truth to power and call power into higher ideals of goodness or justice or something like this. That was a little bit of what I shared earlier. Okay, so I don't know if that's what people were expecting exactly, but that was what was present with me to share in relation to this topic as a way to ground it. So what is it? Coming along, underground philosophy. Someone's here dressed in a black shirt and has just started talking about his own personal relationship with God and actually saying something quite contentious, really. God's not all powerful. I mean, I think we have a different kind of blindness. And I'm not saying it should be approached with anything but absolute humility. Please,